Well, welcome, David. I'm really grateful to you for contributing to our conference at Wolverhampton today, and it's a delight 20 years on to look again at the learning age and the ideas that you generated from it.
Well, firstly, my congratulations to you, Sir Alan. I'm pleased for you personally, but I'm also, as all of us will be, very pleased that your contribution and the drive for lifelong learning's been recognised in this way. So I'm really chuffed for you, as we say in Yorkshire. Secondly, I'm really sorry to everyone that I'm not there in person, but I'm really pleased to be able to contribute in this way.
Thank you, David. In your foreword to the learning age, you argued that learning had a wider contribution, helping make ours a civilized society, developing the spiritual side of our lives, promoting active citizenship, and enabling people to play a full part in their community, strengthening the family, the neighbourhood, and consequently the nation. I wondered where you got such a broad conception of adult learning from.
Well, I'm smiling because I've never written anything better before or since. And I think the honest truth is it flowed from my own experience of having to go to evening class, day release, learning about learning, understanding the window on the world that it opened up, the way in which, for me, it was transformational, not just in terms of getting me to university and getting me on the ladder, if you like, economically and politically, but actually in terms of opening my mind and understanding the glory of broader education. And I just wish I'd been able to inculcate that a little bit more into the system as a whole while I was there for those 4 years.
Looking at that breadth, was it hard to hold on to in negotiations with other colleagues in government and in particular with the Treasury?
It wasn't just the Treasury, it was number 10 as well, that there is a sort of belief which is entirely misguided, that this is the soft underbelly, that this is just about flower arranging. And much as I love flower arranging, it isn't about flower arranging. It's about opening people's minds and their opportunity and their ability to use their talent to the full in all sorts of ways, culturally, economically, of course, but also in terms of the experience of life and betterness and, if I might say so, happiness and fulfillment. And what I had to do was a bit of a sideball, really, which was to persuade them that as the world was changing rapidly, and as people were going to have to move from job to job and learn new skills and adapt to what we now call artificial intelligence and all the rest of it, that actually you wanted people who were mobile, who had portable skills, who could actually take on that challenge of change. And that's still true, of course, with spades on today, 20 years later.
A very large number of initiatives flowed from it. I mean, we had Union Learn, the University for Industry, individual learning accounts, adult and community learning fund, neighbourhood learning for deprived communities, the wider benefits of learning research centre, and then we had Moser and the Skills for Life, e-University, foundation degrees. Which were you proudest of? Which worked and which didn't?
Well, the Union Learning Fund worked, and Lord help us, Philip Hammond allocated some money to it, would you believe? And, of course, neighbourhood and community learning, absolutely fundamental. The thing that really went wrong was individual learning accounts. I've written about it in a recent Fabian publication. But the fact that it went wrong was entirely down to the Treasury not understanding what individual learning accounts were about. I mean, I'd left by the time the fiasco. This is always good for politicians to have left when something goes drastically wrong and someone else has to pick up the pieces. It would not have gone wrong had we actually had what we envisaged in the first place, which was a three-way contribution, the individual, the government, the employer being able to put into an account. We never had accounts. They decided instead that what they wanted was almost a voucher system, which was subject to rip-off, where people decided that they'd offer people a package of measures, most of it pretty low level, for handing over the voucher, which they then redeemed. So there was a lot of lessons to be learned, but the lesson that I came out of it was that it's still the concept which might carry us forward in years to come, which will liberate people to be able to make decisions for themselves, but where there will be a contribution from the wider community and will engage employers in a way which the levy is clearly not doing, and the levy's not working, and we need to find a way of keeping the levy but making it work positively. And I think contributing to individual learning accounts would be one way of doing that.
Well, they are prospering in Scotland, in Singapore, for that matter, in the army. But if you were given the chance to do it again, what would you do differently?
Well, of course, we've got ISAs. We've got all sorts of ways in which people contribute, get tax relief, are encouraged to save. And the late Malcolm Wicks conceived this as a lifelong account, which would then feed into flexible pension and retirement age and all the rest of it. I think that's going to be the future, where you can draw down, you get support from government in doing so, and you can actually enable your own future to be changed in your own hands. But it does involve us being prepared to put money in from government as well as from employers. Yeah, I think the changes from 2012 accelerated what was already happening, and it's a tragedy for part-time mature learning, the Open University. And what struck me, and it still does, is the way in which universities lost the feel for that broader education that we were talking about with the learning age. I'm having a go at the University of Sheffield, where I'm working at the moment, not just in terms of their lifelong learning department, but also in terms of getting departments and faculties to work out how they can reach out again into the community, laying on lectures and tutorials and events that can engage people much more broadly. And that's what extramural departments did. And it often enabled people to have that access, if you like, to understand that they could return to learn throughout their lives, and that university provision was as much for them as it was for the youngsters aged 18.
Yeah, great.
So let's keep the battle going gradually to persuade universities that they're not as badly under the cosh financially as quite often they think they are. They want to try being in local government, for instance. And that really is an area which has been devastated, which is a tragedy again for adult learning, including learning as a second language and all the opportunity that adult learning brings.
I always thought that the remit letter you gave to the Learning and Skills Council was the high watermark of English policy for adult learning, no question. How was it possible for the chair and committee to ignore that element of the remit to do with lifelong learning so comprehensively?
I'm only half joking when I say part of the problem was I'd gone by then.
I agree.
But the other two reasons was the appointment of chairs and chief execs is pretty crucial. And if you haven't actually ascertained properly, and I take responsibility for this, that people have signed up to the agenda, it's not surprising they don't carry it through. The third was that they were under pressure to revert really to what we didn't want, which was to go back to the training and enterprise councils. It was very much seen as an economic only agenda. And of course that's been pressed ever since. The regional development agencies, now demised, were actually seen as just economic. There was a view, and there still is from the Treasury, that social policy, including this broader education agenda, is secondary, whereas actually it's fundamental to economic success and prosperity. The two go hand in hand. And incidentally, there was another major factor, which was what I call the balkanisation of government. The Department for Education and Employment was broken up. And of course, the adult agenda and the skills agenda went into business, didn't it? So it's not surprising that business thought that it was just about business. And I think that was a big mistake. I think that keeping the agenda together, and of course the present government have in part at least restored the combined departmental responsibility, is pretty important, because otherwise you've got two separate strands running, and it's wrong. It's simply wrong.
Nick Stewart told told me at the time, who was your senior official, that all over Europe people said, how did you manage to get employment and education in the same department? It's a great mistake to have split them,
I have to say it was my predecessor, Gillian Shepherd,
Yes,
who
it was,
oversaw
yeah.
that with the excellent Michael Bishard, now Lord Bishard, who was the permanent secretary,
Yes.
and made it happen. And I fought very hard to keep the department together because once I'd gone on to the Home Office, people said, get on with your own business, mate. You know, you leave us to do ours.
And then finally, David, looking back now, is the vision that you laid out in the Learning Age relevant today? And if so, what prospects do you see for lifelong learning in the period ahead of us?
I think it's fundamental. I think that even the industrial strategy that the government produced at the end of last year acknowledged that lifelong learning, I was amazed to find that they actually acknowledged that lifelong learning was important. Whether there'll be any carry through from it, I don't know, because they're just obsessed with apprenticeships, and important as they are a simple part of the jigsaw. I think that with the rapidity of change, with the challenge of technology and artificial intelligence, with the change of employment and jobs, we're going to need lifelong learning in every part of our lives. And the challenge as well, and you and I understand this, is to see people into the latter part of their life with something to contribute and something to draw down on. And lifelong learning will be as important to those of us in our more senior years as it will be for young people, learning that education isn't simply about qualifications. It's about the love of opening your mind, inquiring minds, willingness to learn every day, a new experience. That is why life is so good. And when it's good, it's about education and learning.
David, thanks so much for contributing. Lovely to see you again.